have on screen here, USAID program, this is under the Obama administration, USAID program used young Latin Americans to incite Cuba rebellion, saying that an HIV workshop would be the perfect excuse for political goals in Cuba. And you see is beginning in 2009, a project overseen by USAID sent Venezuelan, Costa Rican, and Peruvian young people in Cuba in hopes of ginning up rebellion. The travelers worked undercover, scouting for people they could turn into political activists. In one case, the workers formed an HIV prevention workshop that USAID memos called the perfect excuse for the program's political goals, basically arguing that Cuban counterintelligence would never think to look at a USAID AIDS program as the locus point for doing CIA covert action.
Do you think that's what PEPFAR was?
Yes, 100%. And I think this is why the military is the main blocking point for cutting PEPFAR funds. This was PEPFAR was a major way. In fact, almost all of AIDS, if you look at AIDS in Africa, the test that they actually used for it was was named after a place in Congo, I believe, the name of the test. But it was, did you experience significant weight loss in the past 30 days? Do you have diarrhea? Do you have a prolonged headache? These are the sorts of things that happen every day in Africa.
Yeah.
While the population rate was skyrocketing, there was no sort of diagnostic. The definition of AIDS kept changing. But what happened is USAID and military money flowed in, and U.S. influence over African governments became a vice grip. In the same way that Big Pharma functions as a lobby in the United States, it functions as a lobby on African governments. And also, most of the money for AIDS relief goes to the military warlords, and it's used for guns. I documented when Bono came out and was on the Joe Rogan episode arguing that USAID cuts had killed 300,000 people so far. I pointed to the fact that when Bono did the Live Aid and Band-Aid fundraisers during the AIDS pandemic, they raised $100 million, and the BBC reported that $95 million went to CIA-backed warlords in Somalia, not to AIDS relief. But when you control the relief, you control the logistics. You're riding around in medical vans. You don't get stopped. You have diplomatic immunity. You can transport weapons and drugs and diamonds and guns through the logistics chain that you control. And so the aid really functions as the front line of the operation. It might as well go directly to special forces. And so I think that's what's happening here. But I do want to get to one other aspect of this, because what we've talked about so far has been reviewing the security clearances, mapping out the other aspects of the corruption. But Trump specifically pointed to RICO because of support for violent protests. And this is something, as a free speech activist and maximalist, I'm very wary of what the counter argument will be, which is that protest activity is protected. And even if protests are large or sometimes get unruly, you should be careful about not going after the right of freedom of speech and the right to protest. But to that, I would like to point the Trump administration to where I believe the RICO case is strongest. And this is when it comes to not just being in the streets and making noise and banging pots and pans, but when it comes to organized criminal activity. And I'm going to play from the Soros-partnered U.S. Institute of Peace that we referenced here. I'm going to play part of a video here from their own video archive, where what they propose is actually, this is what they call nonviolent action. And this is what the Soros groups do under the guise of a kind of Gene Sharp color revolution style nonviolent action is what they call it, this protest activity. Now, this is from the U.S. government. This is on the U.S. government's video archive. I'm going to play just this section, and then I'll get you guys' thoughts on this.
Third category of nonviolent tactics is nonviolent intervention. These include such actions as sit-ins, blocking roads, overloading facilities, establishing parallel or alternative institutions, occupying buildings, and acts of civil disobedience, and even deliberately seeking imprisonment.
So this is the U.S. government guide that I have pulled up now. Again, this is produced by our taxpayers. The U.S. Institute of Peace gets $55 million a year from taxpayers and has a mandatory board spot for the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. These mandatory board spots to have the head of the State Department and the War Department. And it was created by an act of Congress, funded by the U.S. government, our taxpayer dollars. I have their advanced course on civil resistance. Now, all of the folks involved in this course have been involved in the violent riots of the past decade, from backing the BLM, Summer of Love riots to the ICE riots. And even in their own written guide, they propose that groups blockade roads, blockade shipments, blockade the city. They have an entire training seminar here where they get people to strategize about how to block city intersections and like. So I believe when it comes to RICO, it's one thing. There's no problem with establishing parallel or alternative institutions or being in the streets, being an annoying person. But blocking roads is a violation of the law. And when that is organized and premeditated, that becomes RICO. Occupying federal government buildings. These are the same people who called for 1,000 years in prison for anyone who occupied the Capitol building. And yet they will propose to occupy police buildings or government buildings during the Brett Kavanaugh case. These acts of civil disobedience, all of this stuff, that means legal disobedience, breaking the law. And so I think when we need a full accounting of if a subpoena were to be fired off at the Open Society Institute and Churla in LA with the ICE riots to get their internal documents under court order to see how much of that was premeditated. It's no problem if you want to protest the ICE raids, no problem with that. But the moment you block the I-10 and cut off emergency services and the ability to get mail delivered to people's homes, the moment you do that, that becomes RICO. And this is not an accident. What I've just showed on screen are formal U.S. government guides from the very institutions partnered with the Soros Open Society Institute on instructions to do it and training scenarios for how to do it. So we know these groups did it. There's just never been a court-ordered subpoena to actually force them to turn over these documents or to bring the case. And I believe this is where the magic is when you get to this sort of organizational planning. What do you guys think of that?
I mean, anything that you can do to push back on this kind of behavior. The government shouldn't be instructing people on how to basically to protest or inhibit, what other citizens are doing to live their lives, right? Like if you're talking about blocking highways and stuff like that, people have to live their lives. And in the United States, you're free to say, I don't want anything to do with your protest. And the fact that the government is helping to instruct protesters, probably paying money, but helping to instruct protesters in how to do nonviolent protests, which will harm their fellow citizens, right? Like whether it be making people late and possibly losing their job, or you got someone trying to go to the hospital and they're preventing people from getting through, whatever it may be, people have the right to decide to not be involved in your BS. And the fact that the government is funding this kind of stuff, telling people how to frustrate your fellow citizens' lives is absolutely abhorrent. And it should be stripped from the government, and any kind of criminal charges that can be brought up, I think they should do it.
I don't view blocking the free movement of people as nonviolent, right? Like that alone is a fallacy.
Well, what's amazing is so this instructor here, Maria Stefan, who founded the U.S. Institute, or she was the head of the program on nonviolent action at the U.S. Institute of Peace. She's on record saying that they've cleverly defined the term non-action to specifically exclude property damage from the definition.
Yeah, insane.
So she's asked her opinion about the book How to Blow Up a Pipeline and whether or not it's okay to blow up pipelines. And she argues that technically it's okay because under our definition of nonviolent action, property damage is not included.
That's convenient.
Yes, right. So these are the same people. But that sort of thing is RICO. And one RICO case on this network would make 200 other actors in the network never want to do this sort of thing again. And so I completely support the Trump administration's pursuit of it. And I think this is the answer. You get to these deliberate law-breaking sides of it. You go after the organizers, the main institutional cells. You force them under oath to testify and turn over documents in discovery. And I think that would break the whole thing open.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.